So check it out. And now I would like to introduce Teri Speight. Teri, I'm honored to be hosting this Q&A with you after your presentation. You are an urban gardener, and I think many of us here today are going to want to really listen in to what you have to say, because we live in big cities. I live in a big city right near Manhattan, and I'm always talking to people who want to know how to plant native plants in small spaces using planters. So I know you're going to be addressing that. So you're from Washington, D.C. You are an author. You, congratulations, you just put a book out. It's called Black Flora. It is beautiful. And I hope we have some time to talk about this book later. But this is your second book. You also wrote a book with a woman named Kathy Jentz. You co-wrote a book all about urban gardening, and it's called The Urban Garden. So maybe we could put that up in the chat as well. You are known to be a historian and a podcaster. And if another podcast you should all be listening to is called Cottage in the Court. And I just want to say, I try to start my day, most of my days, with an episode of Cottage in the Court. They are very short sort of vignettes of how you're feeling, how the garden is making you feel on a particular day in a particular city across this country. And they are very centering. And without, you know, I want to let you have plenty of time for your presentation. So thank you, Teri, for being here. And I will see you again for Q&A.
Okay, let me get this right here from the beginning. Okay, first of all, thank you guys for having me, and wait till you hear what I came up with this morning. I've had garden club this morning, so haven't had time to post it yet, but I just want to give a preview. When you go outside today, look up. Nature has such gifts for us, and they're not always down. So my program is about dependable plants, dependable native plants in our gardens. I am right outside of DC, and my garden is not as large as my garden was in Virginia. But when I came here, you know, I've got a lot of botanical experience, we'll say, from Virginia, and now I'm in Maryland. And I knew the little bit of so-called lawn that was here had to go. I gave it an eviction notice, and I totally went with a naked palette and started fresh and new. So this is briefly who I am. You know, I am just simply me. I'm simply Teri. And I really believe in getting this thought process about native plants, minimizing the use of water, minimizing the use of fertilizer out to anyone and everyone who will listen. My coworkers hear my spiel. We have green roofs. I work for a commercial developer. We believe in our green roofs. We believe in the green concept and being accountable for what we do in our gardens. Why do we need natives, and why does dependability matter? Because we're busy. If you live in or near a big city, usually you don't have a lot of time to be out there watering and doing all kind of, you know, weeding and dead. We don't have time. So time is an issue. Going native, you do save some time. There are natural resources. Go figure. I believe in looking at whatever's out there. I don't use the word weed. They're plants that are simply out of place. Realizing that it's getting hotter now. Everyone here in the DMV has noticed that. And some of those things that took full sun 3 years ago, they're not taking it. They didn't take it this past year. And the new issues in horticulture that are coming up goes back to our climatic adjustment as well. My philosophy is diversity matters. Having a landscape that incorporates more than one of many things, it makes a difference. Equity. We don't all start in the same place. Everyone can't afford a 3-gallon plant or a mature native. But if you start by seed, you're starting where you can. And in an urban environment, because the bigger the plant, the more you have to water, if you can get a seedling, a sapling, seeds, you can have maybe what your neighbor has. It might take you 3 to 5 years, and that's okay. And inclusivity, include those things that you love. And it may not all be native, but make your natives stand out, because you're not only giving yourself a break, but you're educating your neighbors. The benefits: natives will adapt to the existing conditions. I have a coworker that he was really worried about planting in the ground because, there's all kind of stuff in the ground. Renovated construction. So a lot of times builders will put things in the ground instead of taking them away. Well, he was concerned about that. He has gone totally native, and his garden is fabulous. Natives provide food. We all know these things. They usually do not require additional fertilizer. In my yard, people always asking, what kind of fertilizer do you use? My backyard slopes down. That is my compost. Unless it is diseased, whatever I neaten from my garden, because I don't clean up my garden, whatever I neaten goes over the hill. I slope compost. And while my neighbor last night was bringing all these bags of compost and soil out of her car, I was walking my dog. Why? Because I simply pull my little wheelbarrow up to the hill, take a few steps down, remove any leaves that have fallen. Here's my compost. Free. Mother Nature gave it back to me. I do not use pesticides. Most native plants don't want pesticides. It's water-wise. Natives love the water from Mother Nature. Certain natives will even provide erosion control, and they're beautiful to boot. Shelter for wildlife, helps reduce air pollution. By planting more natives, we're also lowering the temperature between the tree canopy and the ground. I don't know what it's like in Jersey, but here we have noticed a difference because of the lack of tree canopy and the lack of coverage. And in Prince George's County, we are focusing on minimizing and discouraging people from planting more lawn. This is just naturally beautiful. So diversity in the garden, it's a good thing. We know this. Look at the different levels here. By including native, helping everyone, including yourself, because you'll have more time to go and watch wonderful movies like the one we just saw. Seasonal interest. Now, looking at this, people go, oh my goodness, but there's something in there that's a non-native. It's okay. Mixing it up, that's diversity. You have seasonal interest. You have the ability to pull things out and change them easily. And it's a great way to observe growth habits. I bought these planters from a big box store about 3 years ago. Everything in those planters, they were for clients' parties. So she gave them back to me when she was done, because she's not going to water. Those planters, what's still alive in them? Heuchera. And they're prettier than ever. Heuchera. Go native. Aquilegia. These are wonderful things if you have a balcony, if you have a small space, if you just want to have a large pot with a variety of things in them. Try a little prairie drop seed. Make sure that the plants play well together. If it's full sun, do the research, find the full sun items. I have another coworker that recently bought at the Walter Reed site. She has a balcony She's like, Teri, I look outside, my neighbors can see everything that I'm doing. I need some type of screening. So taking a look at it, I was like, look at some native grasses, taller grasses that are going to give you screening and movement. She did it. She said, you know what? I can now go outside and read a book, and I don't have to worry about doing a lot of watering because they're taking care of themselves. I can't wait to hear her joy next year because she's getting a bigger round planter to balance those two rectangular planters, and she wants color in addition to that movement. And once again, I will advise her to go native. Why? It's an opportunity to witness nature up close and personal. It's a time saver, and you can coordinate your plantings by seasonal beauty. What's popping up in the spring? What's going to come up to create a symphony, all by using natives? You can do this. A friend of mine, American Meadows, he has seeds to create a meadow in a pot. So you don't need to have terra firma, as I like to say. Get a big planter or use a cluster of pots and create your own symphony of bloom or foliage. Everything does not need to bloom all season long. Now, there are some annual native seeds that you can use to create summer beauty. But just keep in mind, even we go to sleep sometime. So a pot doesn't always have to be in bloom. Have some foliage, have some movement of grasses. It's a beautiful thing. These planters, using native seeds, cost effective, and you can change it up. And if you really fall in love with some of the perennial native seeds, like RUDBECKIA HIRTA, that is my go-to plant. I love that plant. You can put it in your garden. You can put it in the strip by the street. I call them hell strips, but some people don't like that term. Once again, finding a planter that might have a few natives in it, or creating your own and pulling out all that other stuff. You got a pot. I'm a pot collector. And every chance I get, I use heuchera because it is my go-to. I love it. And it really makes a difference. When you make a difference in your plantings up close, something that will particularly give back to nature using natives, it's a win-win situation. Now, here's one you can even add a living mulch to, like wild ginger. Once again, don't go with a small pot, go with the big pot so that you have diversity. Throw some seeds in there, make it equitable for everyone so that if something doesn't work, your seeds will pop up. Your blueberries, leucothry, or even your ilex, those you use as your centerpiece. Then have something that's going to, once again, keep that symphony going. Heuchera, once it blooms, the leaves are there. Monarda, the native one, I'm finding so much prettier than the scarlet one. And once again, my friend, RUDBECKIA HIRTA, she is everywhere in my garden. And my neighbors are like, how often do you plant that? I don't. I let Mother Nature plant it for me. One of the best ground covers that I have found in my zone 7A garden is my phlox sublata. I don't have what some people call weeds. My phlox, I spread it around and I do not buy mulch. I go over my hill, I enhance the soil every spring, or in the back of my beds, once again, if the foliage is not diseased, I use a pot or a smart pot so that it kind of fades into the background. And anything I clip off, I put in there and have compost on site. it works for me. And particularly if you have a small garden, you may not have shrubs under the tree to create your own little personal compost. Elements of a native planter. Use your imagination. Yes, you can find recipes everywhere for a native planter, what you should put in it, what you shouldn't put in it. But it kind of gets old after a while. So try something new. Make sure that all the plants are compatible. Make sure that their water and light needs are met. We go over this in the urban garden, 101 ways to grow food and beauty in the city. And look at your bloom times. I personally love having, particularly in my shade garden, pots that are just foliage. Why? Because when I'm in my shade garden and I'm reading, I want that restful feeling to follow through, not only in my mood, but in my garden. And I walk my garden every day. My house, I have a path all the way around it. Through my garden every morning, I am paying attention to things like what's blooming now. Gee, do I need to add a little more phlox sublata there? Oh, do I need to add more leaves under my camellias to help kind of give their roots a little comfort? All of these things make a difference in my yard. Thriller, filler, spiller. We hear this about any planter. You can do this with natives as well, particularly on a front porch. One of my clients, I do help people learn how to garden. One of my clients absolutely loves it because her planters are filled with a native grass as the thriller. The filler, we use whatever native she wants to use. And we also incorporate an annual because she does like her color all summer long. And my spiller to date has been phlox sublata. Here, I'm not sure whether it's because of the positioning. I can put it in full sun. She comes out once a week with her milk jug to water it, and that's it. That's it. A lot of natives I put in containers. I don't have to water them every week or every day like you would a non-native plant. So here's a few suggestions. One yard I went to visit recently, they had Indian wood oats in a rectangular planter against a fence. The fence had art cut out in it. It was beautiful. He doesn't have to do anything to it. It makes it beautiful. Wild quinine in a pot. Absolutely a stunner. And I also like to cut it and bring it in small vases. Echinacea, we can all use that. Some of the shorter varieties, though not nativars or cultivars, are great in pots. But you know what? I love my native echinacea in a pot. And with liatris, I have a huge pot of it on my terrace. And let me tell you, it brings me joy because it's like having nature come alive right in front of your face. Heart sun. A lot of children visit my yard because I'm a big kid. And all of these plants here, the kids absolutely love them. I've made hearts out of heuchera leaves. I have used love grass. It tickles their nose. RUDBECKIA fulgida. I still love HIRTA. Depends on your taste. And chelone. Tell a kid you have a plant called hot lips. Turtle head, they love it. They're like, oh, can we play with it? Yes, you can. Touch your garden. Be a part of your garden and let it become a part of you. Blue mist flower. Now, I will tell you, if you have a shady area or semi-shady area, whether in ground or in a pot, blue mist flower is great, but it will make itself more than welcome. Aggressive would be what some people say. I just say it wants to be spread around, shared, put in a pot. It's great in a bodacious pot. Let it fill out. Let it do its thing. Add a little sedge to it. Got a little drapey going on. Once again, heuchera. As you can tell, I love heuchera, but I also love ferns. Ferns are absolutely amazing. At the Botanic Garden here in DC, I fell in love with Spigella, and I could be mispronouncing that, but let me tell you, Indian pinks in a pot, oh, life changer. The kids love it. It is a beautiful, beautiful native plant. As we know, natives have the ability to thrive in spite of it all. So in urban environments, it's generally hotter than hot. Generally, water is scarce unless it comes from above, or you're out there watering a lot. This, I would marry this plant if I could. Amsonia just does it for me. I used it in a landscape in Virginia. He just wanted something simple that was going to give him 3 seasons of beauty. It's a guy, wasn't into major bloom, but when you use Amsonia en masse, there's a gentle fragrance. You'd have to be up close to it, but it really is a nice, fresh smell. And that's not all. You get 3 seasons. This is the bloom up close. 3 seasons. Where I planted this, there's no water. There's no one there to water it. So this is what he wanted. Something that was going to continue to give back, irregardless of what was going on. Full sun, fills in. I've used it and just cut it in vases when he entertains. It is absolutely beautiful with our native asters, because let me show you. In the fall, the colors of this plant, oh my goodness, it's just beautiful. It is beautiful. Imagine, I love blue pots, a big blue pot. In a pot, this just, whoop, it pops. And all season long, you don't have to worry about it. You can use smaller pots in front of it and make a statement, something that blooms perhaps. Because once the blooms finish in the spring, you've got this wonderful green foliage. Once again, I've used it in arrangements, and I've just sat with it and watched it sway in the breeze. And then as it starts changing colors into the fall, people will think, oh my goodness, there's an artist that lives there. You're using nature's paintbrush to make a statement. Our asters are really hot this time of year, but you know what? Put them in a pot. Most people put them in the ground and they kind of get lost amongst the other plants people put in, like mums, cabbage, and kale. Use your asters in a pot. It might be a pot that sits beside that Amsonia all season long. Your shorter varieties, let them sit, pinch them back, allow them to be compact so that you have that Amsonia waving above, maybe an ornamental grass. And when it's time, the aster is right in front of your face. And if you listen, the bees will be singing a song. Hypericum, I've used this in pots. Once again, makes a statement. If you cut it back after first bloom, I've gotten 3 flushes of bloom out of this in one season. Deer don't care for it. You can use it as a hedge. I've used it as a border. If you're in a city lot, you don't have a lot of space to plant. My coworker, Andre, he actually used this just as a colorful border on either side of his yard because he removed his fence. He wanted to invite people in and provide beauty, but also give definition to his space. Now, some people, they just want something out there. Well, some people have used this. I personally don't, because I find it harmful to passersby and dogs. I'm a major dog lover. But I've also seen beautiful strips along the street where the OPTUNIA has been planted, and they'll have a big rock, so it'll drape over. You know what? Why not? RUDBECKIA. I have RUDBECKIA in front of my house in a spot. I don't water. When I water, it is with a milk jug. When I plant, that is it. Even during drought, even during the high heat of DC summers, I do not water. I needed to use my hose last spring, and when I had some roses that I was donating, and I went to water them, the hose had dry rotted. I have not honestly watered my garden. I've been in my house 18 years and 17 years. I just don't make a habit of it. Why? Because I choose my plants properly, and my lot is kind of pie-shaped. So I have what I call 3 different zones. In each different zone, I put plants that play well together and that don't need me to babysit them. Joe Pye weed. I recently attended a conference in Pennsylvania. There is truly a shorter Joe Pye weed, but the native Joe Pye at the base of a hill, a damp spot in the back of your yard, something maybe to hide those trash cans, because you can use your native plants as a screen. It's a beautiful thing. You can also use them in a large pot out of the way if you want to hide your water meter. Joe Pye weed is a good one because I'm not going to say plant it and forget it, but low maintenance, very, very low maintenance. And think about walking around the corner and that wonderful fragrance that it has. You wouldn't know it unless you planted it in a pot where you could really experience it up close and personal. MAHONIA. Some people go, oh, I could put, evergreen in a container and it doesn't do anything. MAHONIA. There are several of these downtown in big concrete planters. During pandemic, I did a lot of walking downtown and no one was watering anything. There is something about seeing MAHONIA in a pot, that wonderful foliage, that yellow bloom, and then watching the bees go crazy over it. I am in love with the gifts that nature gives us. And when you put it in a pot, you can actually see it and experience it up close and personal. Mint, well, you either have the space to allow it to run or contain it. Now, if you have a pollinator garden, which a lot of people here have, they're utilizing those small spaces to incorporate things that will bring beneficials and will make them feel at home. Well, mountain mint is one of those things. It can get happy, make itself a little more than feel at home, but think about it as a rain garden plant. If you have a swale between your neighbors, some areas of DC, we don't want fences. We want something that's going to accommodate the conditions that no one really has to worry about it. Well, consider using this as a rain garden plant. Consider adding a little RUDBECKIA with it. Consider adding your echinacea, penstemon. I personally love to see mountain mint with penstemon. Penstemon, it's like the garden party plant. It will attract everything and create such a musical experience. I sit in nature a lot when I have time. And when I sit and I can hear nature singing back to me, it's a beautiful thing. Whether it's in a pot, whether it's on the edge of my property, or on the edge of a client's property, or on a client's deck. A lot of people here want those plants that you just don't have to do a lot of maintenance for. Now, let me tell you, grasses in a pot, talk about low care, low maintenance, beautiful. You just can't go wrong. Think about your sedges as your drapey in a pot. Heuchera, a sedge, an ornamental grass. Plant it and you're done. Goat's beard. I love this plant. I bought this plant up here from Virginia because I had fallen so in love with it. The children love it. It's a great screen. They love moist environments, on the edge of woods, on the edge of your property. If you, once again, want to screen those trash cans, screen out the neighbors that are not keeping up their yards. It's a beautiful thing. And in a pot, I like to tier my pots. I put goat's beard in. I use Ignatia because once that finishes, the Ignatia comes into life. And then in the fall, my Amsonia. Tier your pots. Make your pots speak to the season in which you want to see color, bloom, structure, or just to enjoy. My combination, because my neighbors, when I first moved here, like I said, I got rid of my turf. I am a busy woman. I work full time. I speak. I coach. I do a lot of stuff. I want my garden to virtually take care of itself, and it does. I've never had a year where my Ignatia has not moved around. It multiplies. It shines. My Amsonia multiplies, it shines. I just love my garden. My Baptisia, right now, my asters are being propped up by the Baptisia because the Baptisia blooms in the spring. And then all summer long, I've got this wonderful filler. Once again, I use it for cut flower arrangements in bloom and when it's not in bloom because it has beautiful pods that rattle in the wind. And right now, my asters are kind of leaning on it like, thanks, our heads are in the sun and we're shining and we're adding beauty. Think about this in a small yard. Let the Baptisia be your backdrop. Plant your lower natives in front of it. Why not? This is why I love ferns. In the midst of pandemic, when no one down here was moving about, I went outside because it was the perfect time for me to really see my garden. A lot of times I work, it's really kind of dark when I leave and really dark when I get home. To witness a fern, and this is from my yard, to capture the beauty of this fern, I found myself going outside every other day to see exactly how much more of it had unfurled. I found myself when the kids were coming around, they had to have their mask on, but it was like, hey guys, look at this. They never noticed a fern unfurling, never. In the city, when everyone is really tight, imagine a fern in a pot. Imagine sitting outside in the evening and watching the fern go from spring to summer to fall. In early spring, watching those little nubs as they begin to peek up slowly. Nature amazes me, and I'm in love with it. And I'm in love with it when I use my native plants, native ferns, native perennials, because they keep coming back bigger and better every year. Once again, at the cottage, I use a lot of yarrow, ornamental grasses, and RUDBECKIA. As you can see, there's iris, there's peony, because I include many plants in my landscape, not as many annuals. I'm not an annual girl. I like dependability. Planting native plants gives you dependability in your garden. You could put a nice dish of water, tilt it up a little bit, put a little sand in it so that it will attract butterflies, it will attract dragonflies, it will attract, it's like a garden party in your yard. I do absolutely nothing to this spot. It is underneath an oak tree, but I will pull up a chair and just sit and look and watch it happen. Your native yarrow, as with most yarrows, if you cut it back after first bloom, you will get a second flush. At least that's been my experience. That's it. Yarrow, the grasses come into being. The RUDBECKIA is there. I call it the last act. And of course, the solidago. I don't remove my solidago. Some people do. Some people are like, oh, it's invasive. It's happy. It's good for the beneficials. I believe in giving back to nature because look at what nature. Some can be used as a ground cover. This is a client's house down in Little Washington, Virginia. I'm using solidago as a mulch. If we had to buy mulch for that site, he would probably go broke. I use it as mulch. We've not mulched it since I installed it probably 14 years ago. I will thin out the solidago. In the spring, there's phlox under there. You don't see it until the springtime. It all works in harmony, in unison. And that landscape, once again, we used native grasses, pretty much solidago, and a few native shrubs. We tried to use a little dogwood. I think that might have needed a little more water than we were able to actually give. But you know what? The landscape has taken on its own mission, I like to say, and we let it be. I got a little pot of phlox laura from Mount Cuba about 4 years ago. Laura is happy in my garden. Laura, I can do a chop mid-June on the front half of it. Why do I do that? Because I want the back half to bloom. When it finishes blooming, the front part is beginning to bloom. I got succession of bloom. I have this in pots on my terrace in the back. I put it in clients' pots because Laura is a plant that you can just keep giving because every year she comes back. Not a drop of water. I don't water. And then there's Amsonia in the front. So I've got Amsonia in the spring, phlox in the summer, the next flush of phlox in the summer, and then the Amsonia in the fall. It is truly a colorful symphony. Diversity, equity, inclusion. That is my garden. That is my garden in the middle of summer. I practice what I preach. I add natives. I had to laugh when people were talking about the buddleia being invasive. I love dark night. I really, really do. But my conscience, I did have it for a couple of years. My conscience would not allow me to keep her. So she's now gone. I've not put in any substitute. I'm waiting because something will call my name. It will be a native and I will replace it. But for now, I do not incorporate it at the cottage. Here's some great books for reading. I love, love, love Planting in a Post-Wild World. It just doesn't get better than that for me. Gardening Revolution, another winning book I think everyone should read. And then, because I am a disciple of Doug, The Living Landscape, Designing for Biodiversity in the Home Garden. Doug Tallamy has my heart. I am working right now in my neighborhood with people with smaller yards to help them create yard space that will give back to nature. We are doing the research. We're finding things that they can include. And a lot of my neighbors are seniors. I'm not advocating that they plant in the ground. Why? Because somebody's got to help them up. But in a pot, now we're talking. In a pot, why? Because they can hang out with their grandkids and talk about what's in that pot. They can see it up close and personal. What's better than entertaining and having a nice native planting in a huge planter and going, yeah, I don't water that. It takes care of itself. A lot of the millennials at work, they have purchased condos. The condos will have a planting plan. Well, a lot of that stuff didn't work. I try to advise them on utilizing their native plants, utilizing maybe a pot if they want annual color, but then around that pot, using some native grasses, using some native shrubs, using something that's going to make them get excited about coming home and not watering, because it's taking care of itself. You'll probably see a lot of Amsonia around any place where I've ventured, because that is one of my go-to plants. These are my photo credits, and I love my bee balm. I love my native bee balm. I love speckled bee balm. Not too partial with the red one. I think I've said it before. Why? Because I see a lot more activity on the native Monarda than I do on other Monardas in the landscape. I'll take any questions.
Hi, okay, let's see. We're back. Teri, that was such an inspirational presentation. That's what the chat is actually lighting up right now, and one right after the other. It's just rolling how inspirational that presentation was. And again, as someone who lives in a city and plants with a lot of pots, I have to agree. So we do have quite a few questions for you, and I'll read them out to you, and we'll just get going. How does that sound to you?
That's perfect.
Okay, so one question that came up is winter. So how does the winter, the cold, affect the plants in the pot? And is there a special, I mean, is there any kind of special end of year techniques that you need to do in order to make sure those plants survive a cold winter?
Well, I use a lot of Carex in pots, and I do that for a reason. Carex, it doesn't really brown in the winter. You'll get a little brown tips, but like leave Liatris stalks up. Have the Carex as a skirt. Talk about a winning combination. You can even throw a little heuchera in that pot. I don't do anything special to my pots in my landscape. That's the beauty of natives. On front porches in DC, DC is a little hotter than where I am. I'm on the edge of the city, but planting in our pot in the city, not a care. And the beauty of it is in the spring, if it's an ornamental grass, you just cut the grass back. The heuchera will put out new leaves. The Carex also puts out new leaves. So low maintenance, low maintenance, low maintenance for busy lifestyles. Here in suburbia, my pots are positioned so that they don't catch a strong wind, but I've never had a planting in a pot of natives that has failed.
Oh, great. And what about winter plants and fall plants? What are some of your favorite fall plants? And maybe it isn't in a pot. Maybe it's in a, a very small backyard city situation where I know in my neighborhood, our houses are attached. We live in row houses and we all have a pretty small backyard, but we make it work. What are some of your go-to fall winter plants?
I leave my grasses up. I do not cut my grasses back in the fall or winter. If it's something that is going to be too seedy, I will cut the seed heads off, but I leave the foliage because that adds interest and protection for any type of beneficial insect that's going to be overwintering in my garden. I look for evergreens that will hold up over the winter. I use a lot of ilex because it gives me interest. There's something about the browning of the grasses and that wonderful evergreen. That's my punctuation point. And if I focus on that and then come up with my like phlox sublata, it's a green carpet. Well, then when it blooms, that evergreen, because if you notice in the landscape, evergreens pop in the wintertime. And in the summertime, they fade into the distance because there's so much other color. Reverse that scenario. Find those interesting natives that have berries, only beneficial berries for the birds. Match that berried plant with an evergreen and watch nature bring the birds in. It's amazing. I'm in my garden 365. So there's never a downtime. I'm not always working in it. I'm enjoying what it brings. And when you have an evergreen, you have a plant with berries, you have a plant with structure and movement, that's your winter garden.
So here's another question I think is a great question. So if you're buying all of these new pots, all different size pots, what do you put in there for soil? How do you get that started? It's different from just planting straight in the ground. So
right. I make my own soil mix because once again, I don't throw anything away in my garden unless it's invasive and I don't plant those. So I'm very careful, but my leaves break down over the hill. Any excessive potting soil, I really haven't bought potting soil in probably 7 years because what my compost does, it enhances whatever soil is in that container. Once you get your soil right with the nutrients from nature, then your plants will thrive. If I do fertilize, pretty much that's in clients' yards. I only use fish emulsion. I have no need for it because when you really think about it, who fertilizes the forest?
And you had mentioned shrubs. What kind of shrubs are in your garden? What species?
Well, it's not native, but I have camellias. I have ilex. I'm getting rid of most of it. I think I have 2 left. I do not plant Nandina anymore. Just can't do it. I have, it's short, it has an arrow leaf. It's not coming to me now, but I let it go and it gives me my green. Mostly for my winter color, I use ilex. I use red twig dogwood. That's pretty much most of my winter color.
And one more question about pots, and then I want to talk about your book a little bit more. What are the pots made of that you use? Are they terracotta? Are they concrete? What are they made of, and what do you recommend?
I recommend buying pots that are frost proof. Different garden centers will have different lines. And people go, oh my goodness, but they're so expensive. But let me tell you, I have a lot of crescent planters, but let me tell you about frost-proof pots. What you pay for them now is going to reward you for, I don't know, those clay pots that are going to crack because it gets too cold and it gets too damp. So invest in your pots. Your pots, your hardscaping, are your bigger investment. And then you plant your natives. We're talking saving money twofold here. Good pots, native plants, add whatever you want to it. you will save money, because when everyone else is going out and buying those annuals every year, your garden is giving back and you don't even have to buy a pot.
Excellent. Well, that I hope that we have inspired people who, maybe you don't live in a city, but you still want to plant with pots. But for all of those that do have terraces and porches, it is possible. And so thank you, Teri, for covering all of that. Now I just want to talk about your book with the time that we have left. We have, just a few minutes left before our next guest. But talk about this lovely book. The photography is really stunning, but I've heard you talk about the book. Washington Post wrote a beautiful article recently when the book came out. So tell us the story behind bringing all of these incredible gardeners together from across the country. Where did you get the idea for it?
Well, my editor, Deborah Prince-Singh of the Slow Flower Movement, we're both garden communicators, members of GardenCom, and she said, Teri, I've got this idea and I want you to help me with it. And we had a discussion and we decided, so people need to know that we're not a monolith. A lot of times you hear about farming and African Americans farming and it's vegetables. Well, we actually do more than that. We grow. And I'm even pushing some of the people in the book as cut flower farmers to use more natives, because why not? What's wrong with using liatris in an arrangement? And you don't have to buy seed for it every year. What's wrong with using coneflower? Look at your natives. What's wrong with using what's in the garden now in your arrangements? They had not really considered this before. A couple had, but a lot of the new farmers did not consider this before. So we chose people that were part of the slow flower movement, people that were not part of the slow flower movement, but that were actively gardening, designing, creating a stir in their communities about flowers, flower farming, and florists. And from Seattle, one of the women in the book in Seattle is actually giving a workshop today where she transformed her tiny house and tiny lot using native plants, nativars, and annuals and perennials into a place where she can actually draw from her garden and make arrangements. So it truly is a labor of love, because as many people have told me, nobody knew. No one had really explored this before. So I am so grateful and thankful to the ancestors for letting me be the mouthpiece to get this conversation going.
Well, it has been lovely to spend this time this afternoon with you. Thank you for being a part of our program. I'm going to let you have the last word. How can people reach you? And what's the best way to get in touch with you? And how can they find this book?
Well, the book right now is on back order because we kind of sold out. Shocking. We had no idea. But it should be available again in January. Fingers crossed, publishing and trucking and all that's kind of crazy right now. But I will be actually interviewing people from the book on my podcast. We chose not to do it over the summer because people were growing. Weddings, people were catching up on weddings. So a lot of the florists in the book were just slammed. But pay attention, listen to their voices. We are going to make this a movement to keep it going and include natives, because natives are going to save everyone a lot of money as we enhance beauty inside and outside of our homes.
Well, thank you so much. Please stay in touch with Native Plant Society of New Jersey. And if we are ever in the DC, it's not too far away, we're going to look you up. Have a good
over, and I'll be up to Jersey.
Okay, yes, you're always welcome to Jersey.
Okay.
Have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.